So I was about 90 to 95% complete with a major update, a big refresh to the Nikon Zf tutorial course, long overdue, spent weeks working on it, when Nikon released a major update for the firmware for the Nikon Zf. The timing could not have been worse. So rather than go through and redo every single lesson, 17 different videos, what I want to do here is just make a compilation of all of the new features available in firmware version 2.0 for the ZF. And there's a lot, and there are some big improvements, like being able to use the C position on the ISO dial to toggle auto ISO on and off. There's a digital zoom feature for video recording and some changes to the focus interface. So you're going to find all of those in this video with examples. First, let's get you updated to firmware version 2.0. My favorite way, the easiest, is to just use the SnapBridge app. If you have your camera connected to your smartphone via the app, it's going to give you a message on the top to let you know there's a new firmware version available for your camera. And it'll take you through everything you need to do, which is really nothing. The app and the camera are going to do it all for you. It's really easy. The other way to update your firmware, if you don't have the app, is to go to the firmware update page for the ZF, which you'll find linked here, download the update file, and then transfer that .bin file over to your SD card in the root folder, the top folder. You don't want to put it in any subfolders, just copy it straight over. And then after you pop that SD card into your camera, go into the setup menu, firmware, update, and follow the instructions there. Once you've updated your camera's firmware to version 2.0, go ahead and follow along in this video to see all of the new features available in your camera. So just going over some of the general updates first, if you're using manual focus, you'll notice that the focus scale, that little bar in the lower third, now shows your focus distance, and that can be configured in meters or feet. That's only going to show up if you're using a compatible lens. That's a good focus aid. Speaking of focus, the live view zoom function, when you press zoom in so you can check your focus, that now goes to 400% zoom instead of stopping at 200%. You can now also upload custom picture control profiles created in and save to the Nikon Imaging Cloud. We now have Nikon Imaging Cloud support. This also includes the flexible color feature. You can also create that in the NX Studio software. I'm going to do a whole other lesson about that flexible color feature, but you can now save those to the Nikon ZF. Long exposure noise reduction is now available when the electronic shutter is used in interval timer shooting, time-lapse video, and the focus shift shooting modes. Speaking of focus shift, the flash is going to be disabled using focus shift in an interval of 0. Got to give that flash time to recharge. Another fairly significant update, one that I'm really a big fan of, is you can now use the C position on the ISO dial to act as like an auto ISO position with your saved auto ISO settings. So you can use manual ISO with all of the numbers on the ISO dial. And then if you want to enable auto ISO, now you can just flip it to C instead of having to go into the menus to turn on auto ISO. So to set that up, you'll set your ISO dial to C and then go ahead and enable auto ISO in the photo shooting menu ISO sensitivity settings. That C position will now be saved with auto ISO. Then rotate the ISO dial to any manual number, disable auto ISO, and now you can rotate the ISO dial to any number to set that ISO, as you see here in the lower right, and then watch as I rotate that dial to the C position, it's going to instantly enable auto ISO. There are some other minor bug fixes and improvements, miscellaneous updates like increasing the IPTC character limits and the FTP options. We're not really going to cover those in depth. Let's now look at all of the new menu settings and options that are available, starting in the photo shooting menu. Secondary slot function, if you're using the JPEG primary and JPEG secondary option here, you can now record the large file size. If you go down to the AF/MF subject detection options, you'll see that birds has been added as a detection type for all of you bird photographers. In the auto bracketing menu, you can now change the increment in third stops from 1 to 3 stops. Previously, you could only change it in third stops from 0 to 1, and then you could only change it in whole stops from 1 to 3. Now you can change it in third stops throughout that entire range. If we go into the video recording menu, the AF/MF subject detection options here also has birds added to it. At the end of the menu, there's a new option called High Res Zoom. And if you turn this on, you can zoom into your frame without using a zoom lens if you have FX set for the image area. So when that's enabled, you're going to see HR on the screen. You can then use the multi-selector right to zoom in and left to zoom out. If you are using this, the AF area mode will be set to the wide, large area, and electronic vibration reduction will be turned off if you had it enabled. We're now going to go into the custom settings menu, starting with A10, where you have your focus point options. There's another additional option here, focus point border width. You now have 3 options for your focus point. You can make it thicker to be easier to see. There's an additional option, B3 Easy ISO. If you enable this, you can set the ISO dial to the C position and then use a command dial to adjust your ISO instead of having to use the dial. If this is enabled, the B2 Easy Exposure Compensation option will be disabled. You can't use Easy ISO and Easy Exposure Compensation at the same time. The command dial that you're going to use to adjust the ISO is going to be the one that is not used to adjust the exposure variable depending on whatever mode you're in, whether that's P, S, or A. Another new option, D5 in the custom shooting settings, exposure delay mode. This is very similar to the self timer. It should really only be used for photographers who exclusively do long exposure photography, because when anything but off is selected here, the shutter release is going to be delayed for that set time after pressing the shutter. And that's going to allow time for any kind of vibrations to settle out before the exposure is made for long exposures. But remember that there will be a delay for every single photo until you turn it off. And that could cause you to miss some kind of great moment if you have this delay enabled. You press the shutter button, and now you have to wait a half a second until that exposure is created. D13 used to be called D12, view all in continuous mode, but now that's D13, display on during burst. Just means that your viewfinder, your display is going to stay on during a burst mode instead of turning black. New options in the D group and the G group, half press to cancel zoom for manual focus. You're probably going to want to enable this if you're using both a power zoom lens and manual focus mode. So if you're using the power zoom feature, you can press the shutter button halfway to cancel that zoom, which will allow you to more accurately focus manually. Because zooming changes your depth of field, so you don't want to be zooming and focusing manually at the same time. The F1, F2, F3, G1, and G2 customize iMenu and customize control, the submenus. There's a lot of new options added to these menus based on the new features, like power zoom lens support and the exposure delay mode. So just go through here, check out all of the new available options to see if any of them might be useful to you. Additionally, you can press the delete button, the trash can, to reset that button to the default controls, to what Nikon originally released this camera for that control. You can also press and hold the trash can button for 3 seconds to reset all controls to the factory defaults. The F4 Touch FN menu has a new double tap option available to move focus point. So if you have move focus point selected here, you can press the multi-selector right to choose whether double tapping on the screen will reset the focus point to the center, or set the focus point based on where you tapped on the entire monitor versus where you tap in relation to the touch FN area. F11 zoom ring control for power zoom lens is a new option. Two little options here. Reverse zoom ring rotation. You can turn this on to reverse the direction that the zoom ring is rotated to zoom the lens in and out. And then zoom ring rotation range. You can set the rotation range to go from a full wide angle view to a full telephoto focal length. Default's just going to maintain the default range, but you can set like a shorter rotation range if you want to quickly go from wide to telephoto. More new options, F12 and G8, assign power zoom. You can choose whether or not the zoom in and zoom out buttons on the back of the camera can be used to zoom a power zoom lens, or just use the lens switch to leave that off. You can also set the speed of that zoom action for both the buttons and the lens switch. The custom settings G group for video recording has another new option, G7 high res zoom speed. This is where you can set the speed at which the camera is going to digitally zoom if you have the high res zoom feature enabled in the video recording menu. The scale ranges from -5, a slow zoom speed, to +5, a fast zoom speed. The G15 brightness information display menu has some new options in there. You can press the multi-selector right to customize both the histogram and the waveform. You can adjust the size of these brightness displays, adjust the transparency on the screen, and also adjust the position. Looking at playback real quick, if you are in playback mode and you press the I menu to pull up the playback I menu and you go to retouch, you're going to see a new option here, customize retouch options. You can press the multi-selector right to remove the check mark from the retouch options that you don't wish to see in the retouch menu. There are a lot of options that I never use when I'm retouching photos, so I uncheck all of those. And now when I'm in the retouch menu, it's a much shorter, more manageable menu. A couple of new things in the playback menu. Series playback has a new option here, auto series playback options. It gives you a few new options for how the auto series playback is going to behave if enabled. Loop will loop that playback over and over until you stop it. Wait before playback sets a delay for when the slideshow is going to start. And then in auto series playback speed, you can set the playback at either a manual frame rate or the frame rate, the speed that that particular burst was created in. Record camera orientation is a new option. Enabling this will record the camera orientation, either vertical or horizontal, to the metadata so that it can be corrected to be right side up when you're viewing it in a compatible computer program. Going into the setup menu, non-CPU lens data looks a little different. The way that you're going to enter the focal length and the maximum aperture has changed. Then there's also a new function here at the bottom, choose aperture to record function. If you enable this, it's going to let you rotate the sub command dial to change the aperture value that's recorded to the EXIF data instead of just the entered maximum aperture. You're still going to use the lens aperture ring to adjust the actual aperture you want to use. However, this feature lets you match the recorded aperture and the actual aperture. So your metadata, your EXIF data, is going to display the actual aperture that was used. But that's going to require constant attention on your part to constantly change to make sure the two of them match if you want it to be accurate. And then in the network menu, there's a new option here, Nikon Imaging Cloud. The Nikon Imaging Cloud service, like we mentioned, the ZF now has support for this. This lets you upload photos to the cloud, share them with others, a whole bunch of other features. You will need a Nikon Imaging Cloud account to connect, and this is going to be the topic of a future lesson. We're going to go into this in further detail. But in the meantime, you can create an account if you want, and then just go through this menu to see all of the features that are available. So that's it for the firmware version 2.0 for the Nikon ZF. Those changes will also be reflected in the text for all of the lessons in this course in red so that you can see what's new in firmware version 2.0 and then what's older and may not be reflected in the videos for all of the lessons.